I'm Jason Offet, staff developer at Rangle. We're going to talk a little bit about Next. So, who here has heard NextJS? Hands up. Right, everybody who hasn't. Who's actually deployed some NextJS? Oh, wow. That's pretty good. You're wasting your time here then. You know it already. Oh, well, but that's okay. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about some political stuff. We're going to talk about a little technical stuff. We're going to get into a little bit of opinionated kind of stuff. And if you hate animated GIFs, you're in the wrong presentation. All right, so the question that we're going to try to address in, oh yeah, let me start my timer. So I want to get you out of here in under 2 hours. So kidding. 30 minutes max. I think we'll crawl into that. Okay.
The longer the better.
Longer the better. Got it. More NextJS. Okay. So I'm actually relatively new to NextJS. I'm working on my second project right now. And but I have, maybe like a lot of you, heard this is the next coming. This is the future of React. It is NextJS. And so I started to think to myself, why is that? Why are so many people saying it's the future? So I started doing a little research. Started looking around. Started looking at the code I was actually writing for a change instead of just writing it on a pilot. I'm kidding. I think very thoughtfully. Everyone at Rangle thinks very thoughtfully about every line of code. All right. So, and I have a laser pointer. So we're going to do a little NextJS primer for like the, I guess, 6 of you who are unfamiliar. We're going to talk about why are customers moving to NextJS. We're also going to be talking about some use cases where NextJS may not be that useful. Maybe. We'll see what you think. And then we're going to draw a conclusion. We're going to decide right here, right now, is it the future? Thank you. Next. All right, let's start our primer. NextJS. Not to be confused with NestJS. How many times have I meant to say NextJS and said NestJS? Those are two completely different things. NestJS is strictly a back-end platform. It's very good from what I've heard. I haven't tried it. Anybody here tried Nest? Couple, right? Okay. We're not talking about Nest. So if I screw up and say it, I actually mean Next. Check mark, not arrow. All right. Have you ever tried to describe NextJS to somebody who doesn't know what it is? It is difficult. Before, when I started hearing about it, I started looking around for a good definition. It is very hard to find. I did come across this Reddit post. It touched me very deeply. Can anyone, for those of you who can't read it in the back, can anyone tell me exactly what is NextJS? As the explanations everywhere are a bit vague, even on the website. They're not very clear. Is it an extension of ReactJS or an independent front-end framework? Both? Kind of? And neither? So let's get into that a little bit. Unfortunately, no one can be told what NextJS is. You have to deploy it for yourself. To the 7 people who've seen the original matrix in the room. All right. Is it a superset of React? In some ways, but not really. Right? Because we are a group here, we are a lot of developers, we tend to take definitions very seriously. It is not strictly a superset, but it's sort of in that neighborhood. Is it the angularification of React? You could make that argument. Some people do, right? If you squint really hard, yeah, it's a little bit of an angularification. Is it a hostile takeover of React by Vercel? If you don't know who Vercel is, we're going to talk about them in a minute. Possibly with the assistance of the Illuminati or Zombie Elvis. Equally as plausible. Could be any and all of those things. Who is Vercel? So, Vercel is a cloud company. They were formed in 2015, originally under the name Zeet. They changed their name to Vercel in 2020. They are the ones who first released NextJS in 2016. They actually own the NextJS logo and the name, but the project is an open source project. Why do we care about Vercel and who they are besides the fact that they control the logo? We have started to see this migration of control, of authority, of influence on React Core away from Facebook, Meta, and towards Vercel. You've seen core team members leave Meta, go over to Vercel. Not a very obvious career path choice, right, for those kinds of developers. So it's made a lot of people go, why is that happening? We've also seen the deprecation of the Create React app. Everybody tried the Create React app, I assume? Everybody's used that, yeah? Still there, do not panic. Do not run for the exits and download it. It will still be around, but it's no longer being developed. There's actually an excellent post here by one of the original maintainers. Are we making these slides available? I think we are. If you get the slides, the link is there. I've got a few links in here. It is quite an interesting read. It's a bit long. There's some performance problems with it, yada, yada, yada. But he does make a good case for why it was time for the Create React app to go away. Just so happens, there is a Create Next app that sounds and looks a lot like the original Create React app, which is pretty good. So why do we care about, so the reason we care about Vercel is they are taken over. Not officially, but you can see it going in that direction. This is the political part of the talk, by the way, right? Some people are very happy about that. Some people are happy to see Meta move away from their overseeing of React and move over to a smaller, nimbler company like Vercel who's going to pay more attention. Others, not so much. They liked very much the fact that there was a big company like Facebook, Meta, behind React, that they were pushing it. So whatever side of the fence you're on, it's good news, bad news, but I think what we can all agree on is this shift is moving, right? There is that influence going over. I'm sort of on the fence, maybe a little bit on the Vercel side. I do like to see one slide too far. I do like to see a plucky upstart do well. And I think it probably needs a little bit of an infusion of new energy into the React ecosystem, right? So, how well is Next actually doing? These numbers are incredibly difficult to find, and even when you find them, they mean very little. So these are NPM, this is from NPM trends, right? These are actual downloads. What does it mean? To be honest, not a tremendous amount. Like, so I've added Angular here. Nothing wrong with Angular. Love Angular. You couldn't pay me enough to code it. No, I'm kidding, you could, but it would be a lot. We do great Angular work. It is a very robust ecosystem with lots of customers. Angular's doing well. But it is sort of a favorite of larger enterprises, right? It is, wait, can you guys see, am I walking here? No, you're fine, okay, good. So, since it's larger enterprises that tend to download it, fewer downloads, right? Whereas lots of people play around with React and download it, except obviously at Christmas time. I was trying to figure out these dips, and I'm like, why is that? I guess everybody's on vacation snowboarding and not downloading React. But you see the same sort of dips, maybe not quite as dramatic, in Next as well as a tiny little bit. Teensy, tiny Angular. Angular's fine. I will stop hacking on Angular. Pardon me?
Angular doesn't look fine.
But it really is. Because I will get, because the Rangle communities person is in the back saying, we're never letting him speak again. we have a very big Angular business. We love our Angular customers. Please don't leave us. We love you, Angular customers. Yeah, so Angular's fine. Sure, we'll say yes. But you can see Next growing. You know, it's certainly been doing well in the last few years. And it's mirroring the React curve. Again, these numbers mean very little because they're downloads and what do downloads mean. But I think you can see the trend, right? That it is up, that it is moving, and Next is on the upswing. All right, here's my definition. So if you want to listen to me, and God help you if you do, but if you want to listen to me about what is Next.js, I just hit my own mute button. There we go. So I would call it an expanded framework around React. Now, I know there are people who don't believe React is a framework. And those people don't get any more pizza. I know, it's not, but it kind of is. But okay, it's not, whatever. So I would either say it's an expanded framework or it turns React into a framework, however you want to say it. Integrates client and server. We're going to get into that in a little more detail in a bit. Adds functionality, particularly on the server side, because hey, React is not a server-side platform, right? You can kind of trick it out and add a few libraries and do some wacky crap. if you want, but really React is client-side, right? So we're integrating client-side and server-side. Part of what I think is most powerful is this enables this fluid movement between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. I mean, as fluid as you get, right? They're two different animals. It's like dogs and cats living together, total anarchy. But they do need to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think the way Next does it, and yes, there are other libraries that do this as well, and maybe arguably better in some point instances, but in terms of an overall package, I think Next does this very well. Addresses some long-standing issues in React, specifically around server-side rendering and routing. It can significantly improve the performance of React apps in certain kinds of apps, so we're going to get into that in a little more detail. It also gets opinionated about a few things, right? Now we as React devs, we're not so big on people telling us their opinions when it comes to how we write our code. So there is some natural resistance, I think, in our community about opinionated platforms, about opinionated frameworks like Next, but enterprise customers like it. They like it when there are standards. They like it when they have 100, 200, 500 developers, and there's a right way to do everything, right? So it's big with that crowd. And it does require a server platform. So for those of you like me who have deployed lots of React apps, you just hang it out on an S3 bucket, download it from a script file, and away you go. Cannot do that, obviously. Or maybe not obviously, but you cannot do that in the Next environment. You've got to host that on a platform like, hey, Vercel offers hosting. What do you know? So that's part of their interest, is the revenue that comes from hosting those platforms. So, Jason's definition of Next.js, take it or leave it. 2, why are companies moving to Next.js? What is the hubbub about? Why has it got so much hype and so much fire? This is why I believe so. The 2 R's of server-side. Wait, server-side? Yes, we're going to talk about server-side. Routing and rendering. Yay! We're all full-stack devs again. Yay! Who used to be a full-stack dev? You are again! You can be! I was a full-stack dev for years, and for the last 5 or 6, I've had to admit that I was a Ruby on Rails backend guy. There's not a ton of Rails projects out there anymore. So it's hard to really call myself full-stack. But now, with Next.js, I get to be full-stack again. So, here's a slightly controversial statement. Routing and SSR have always been problematic in React. You may not entirely believe that, especially in the last few years. There are some pretty good libraries out there that do both. And again, in some point instances, you could argue they even do them better than Next. But my argument to you is, there is no platform, right? And I know somebody in the back there is going to say, what about Remix? Maybe we can talk about Remix in the end if you want. But I think it's the best package, at least I've seen, that puts all of this together, right? Takes all the server-side routing, takes all the server-side rendering, and by the way, there's a whole ton of crap that Next does and does great that we're not going to talk about today. Because again, I'm trying to get you out of here in under 30 minutes, right? So I'm only going to talk about sort of the big things, and for me, the 2 big things, again, are routing and rendering. Let's talk a little bit about routing. I have tried to avoid it almost my entire career in React, because it sucks, right? It just sucks. And so I've gone to work lately on these Next.js projects, and like, I'm working on this project right now, and they have like 75 pages, 75 different URLs that we have to create. And I'm like, really? In React? Is there another project I can work on? So then I started looking at and my manager was like, no, the routing's really simple, it's really easy. And I'm like, yeah, I've been promised that for like 7 years in React. And every time, it's never as good or as simple or as helpful as it's supposed to be. It's not bad. It's not spectacular, right? But it's not bad, especially the app router. So if you've used old Next with the Pages router, it's still not great. But the new generation app router is actually pretty good. And we're going to get into that in some detail. I'm actually going to show code. Ooh, we're getting into some code. Screenshots, not live code. I'm not insane. All right. But we're going to do some screenshots. All right. Dynamic routes are actually pretty good. And we're going to get into that a little bit. And no need to fake out the URL in the address bar anymore. Yes! If I never write another function that has to override what's in the address bar in case somebody hits refresh again, mamma mia! I never want to do that crap again. Okay, so again, if we get these slides, I think we're going to make them available. All of these screenshots are at the URLs I put at the top here, so you can go and check them out. So all I'm doing here, this is a screenshot from the very simple create next app program, right? To create it from scratch. So you're gonna like, do I want TypeScript? Yeah. Blah 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 blah. Tailwind, up to you, obviously. Do I want to use the source directory in this project? Answer is yes. Do I want to use app router? Answer is yes. What do I get for that? All right. So over here is my file tree, right in my IDE. I take a file. It's called page. This actually project is not using TypeScript. What? But the example here is not using TypeScript. I didn't feel like making my own screenshots of that stuff there. But I think it's important for you to be able to look them up, right? Because I always appreciate when I download a presentation afterwards if I can actually go and find the actual examples. And I thought that was more valuable than creating my own. So I drop a file into the About folder, and lo and behold, that file shows up in the browser as /about. It doesn't get much more simple than that when it comes to routing, right? Again, there's a handful of you going, I've got a library that does that. I've had it for 4 years. True, right? But it wasn't integrated into React the way this one was. So this is how the app router works. And again, I would only ever recommend using the app router, not the Pages router. Yes, the Pages router is easier. We can have that debate afterwards over drinks if you like, but my recommendation, always go app router. So, whatever your base URL is, / whatever that folder is, whatever that folder is, whatever that folder is, that's your URL, and that's where we'll find the content. You can go as deep as you want, as far as you want. Anybody else, because whenever I'm writing code, not everybody thinks this way, but whenever I'm writing code, I'm always thinking about who's coming after me, right? Once I get hit by a bus, because there's a few bus drivers who have it out for me, by the way. If I get hit from by a bus, who is the developer coming after me, or even me coming back to code that I wrote 6 months ago because my memory isn't that great, and I'm like, who wrote this crap? Oh, wait. I look at the blame file, and it was me. Anybody who comes and sits down can figure out this file system. It's really simple. Dynamic routes. Thank you, Jesus. So, anytime I want to put a dynamic route in, so let me go back one. So right here, right where I'm creating my file structure, I can create a name of a folder, and as soon as I put that in square brackets, it's a dynamic route. That's it. Square brackets, baby. So now, I've got my square brackets in my route. When the URL has a number there, it just gets passed into the component as a parameter. I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to parse the URL, I don't have to F around with the window object, I don't have to do any of that other crap. It just gets passed in as a parameter. Super simple, super easy. Again, developer after me can figure it out, hands down. Okay, who are my refugees from Rails? Have we got any Rails people in those? Yes, thank you. All right, love you. 2 of us. The rest are all dead. They were all on the same bus that got hit by that person who's still looking for me. Okay, so in Rails we had this concept of a partial, right? And partials were very useful. You could have like part of a web page. And so that comes back in React. As soon as somebody introduced me to layouts, I was like, that's just a Rails partial. I still believe Rails figured out a lot of crap, but I digress. So what it does, what these groupings do, is it allows you to have a partial JSX file that lays out, right, some content for your page, and then everything downstream of that page inherits that partial. So I can set a header, right? I can set a top nav, right? And it just automatically inherits all the way down. And so, but I can do it in steps, right? So this layout file goes to everything in designer and developer routes, but this layout file only applies to those two, right? But they overlap to each other. It's very useful, especially if you've got some complex interacting pages. Like Natalia's nodding because we're on the same project right now, and we have a lot of that. So it's turned out to be very useful. All right, so the other big server-side benefit is server-side rendering. So I don't know if you're like me, but I got into React, I want to say 2016, 2017 when I started. And there was a toggle for server-side rendering, and I turned it on, and I spent like 3 months pulling my hair out trying to make that damn app work, and I never could, and I gave up, right? So, and I haven't gone back since because the PTSD was deep. I'm sensitive, as you may have already noticed. So, server-side rendering in Next is actually really simple. It's by default, as a matter of fact. You have to turn on client-side. So, why do I want to do server-side rendering? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is fetching data. Closer is just closer. And what I mean by that is, wherever your Next server is, wherever you're hosting that, it's probably a hell of a lot closer to your data source than your client, right? And so closer is just closer. You get that data much faster. Security. They can't skim what they can't see. So if the API call is never leaving, say, the walled garden of AWS, or even if you're calling somewhere out to a third-party database, it's still going between the server and the database. Man, minimal attack is, granted, not impossible, but way harder, right? So it tends to be much more secure just by nature of the fact that the client is not calling your data source. Caching, the gift that keeps on giving, right? Next does a great job of automatically caching a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just a lot faster, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to manage the cache. Love that. Love it when I don't have to do it. Smaller bundles. All you bundles, undependent, throw your hands up. Sing along. I realize it's the wrong GIF. This is put a ring on it, or put your finger on it. Ring on it, yes. But it's a better GIF, so I didn't do this. Smaller bundles. So if I am rendering on the server, and I've got some big-ass libraries, I'm not downloading those big-ass libraries to the client. They're just living on the server. They're being put together and rendered there. I've got much smaller bundles coming down to the client faster. That makes initial page loads much quicker, much smaller. Again, somebody sitting at a laptop and a fast Wi-Fi connection, who cares? On a mobile device, in an elevator, start to care much more. So, initial page load is much faster. Oops, that's why I put mobile in brackets there. SEO and sharing. I think we've all, as React devs, had to live the helmet pain of trying to do SEO with React, right? Helmet. SEO and sharing, by what I mean sharing is deep links, right? So this project that Natalia and I are working on, many, many pages, many deeply nested pages. But clients can share those deep links and the app doesn't blow up, right? Because all the routing is done, server-side rendering is almost always done, super easy. And the SEO, no helmet, super easy, built in. What are some circumstances when NextJS is not that useful? Because there are some. Single page apps. If you're not doing any routing, then all the routing benefit, obviously not that useful, right? And so the example I like to think of is the React founder of Facebook At least for, now hey, Facebook does lots of other crap, right? But if you're on that single news feed, if you're on the eternal scroll, and you're not going anywhere else, how useful is the routing? Not that useful. So if you've got a simple, single page app, which I love to make, right? As a user, I love to use, then the routing is obviously not that useful. If you're calling APIs that are not on your own server, right? If all of your API calls are to some third party, if you're using Firebase, whatever your architecture happens to be, you're going to lose a lot of that caching and a lot of that efficiency if you're not calling back into Next. Doesn't mean it's useless, but it becomes less useful if you're not calling back into that same framework. If your data patterns don't naturally cache, and let's face it, there are a lot of them. Again, I'll go back to the infinite scroll newsfeed example, right? If I'm seeing a bunch of new content every time and there's not much there that'll cache, then all the caching benefit that I might otherwise get from something like Next, it's not going to help. Necessarily client-side apps. Who are my shameless watchers? Any shameless watchers out there? It's a good show. It's not safe for work to not watch it on your laptop at work. When you watch the first episode, you'll understand why. But it's a good one. So if you find yourself, when I say putting use client everywhere, so if you've got a component, right, and it needs to use state, or for whatever reason it's using a library that requires it to render on the client, you put quote use space client quote at the top. It will not be server-side rendered, and it will serve the page like any other React app, right? So if you find yourself using that everywhere, you might be wondering, should I bother creating a Next.js app? Maybe not. If your app is all forms, right, and that sort of ties in the first one, you're going to have to use clients for most of the time. You can sometimes get away with it, but very often, if you're using forms, you're going to have to client-side render it anyway. So again, not a super strong reason to use Next on its own, unless, in our case, you have an incredibly deeply nested, hierarchical bunch of forms that need to be routed, and so then it sort of balances out. But form heavy, less benefit from Next.js. And I alluded to this just a minute ago. If you're using useState or a lot of hooks, in a lot of different cases, those need to be client-side rendered anyway, and you're flushing away a bunch of the benefit, right? So, I made, I think, a bit of a case for why Next.js is awesome. I actually think it's pretty awesome. I may also made a bit of an opposite case for, well, maybe some cases where you wouldn't want to use it. So, now we're going to answer the big question. Is Next.js the future of React? Before I answer that, let's take a poll. Not that kind of poll. All right, let's take a poll. Who thinks Next.js is the future of React? Raise a hand. I suck at this. All right, who thinks it is absolutely not the future? All right. Who thinks they're in a bingo hall and they're waiting for me to call B5? There we go. You were just here for the pizza and the beer, I get it. All right, I did not change a lot of minds. I'm going to say, in my opinion, Next.js is well positioned to be a big part of future React. You like my wiggle word? I got a future in politics, maybe. Big part. Big part. So, it includes good fixes, again, for some of the long-standing problems in React. A lot of the pain we've had for years and years and years. Yes, there are lots of other point fixes in other libraries out there, and you can slap them together and build your own solution. But all bundled together in one adds a lot of value. Oops, too far. All right, more opinionation and structure is likely to increase interest from larger enterprises. Why would we care about that? Like it or not, it's going to be adoption from larger enterprises that injects a whole lot more money into that ecosystem, right? The angularification of React is a good thing for the ecosystem as a whole. Again, as a bit of a pirate developer who likes to do things the way I like to do things, doesn't like people telling me how to write the code, it bristles, right? A little bit. But I think it does make the whole ecosystem stronger and will draw more attention. Vercel's influence over the future of React. Since Vercel is so tied to Next, again, we talked about why I spent so much time talking about Vercel. Oh, I'm at the 30-minute mark, okay. Suck it, no questions. I'm kidding. We'll still have questions. Because Vercel is so tied into Next, and they are arguably doing a semi-hostile, semi-friendly takeover of the core team of React, I think inevitably we're going to see more integration, more influence, more togetherness between those two, whether we like it or not. And the standardization, again, server-side functionality and interface. It's good. Right? It takes me back to the old days when, client server, I don't know if anybody remembers that term, when that used to be a cool thing. There were magazines. There were physical magazines on the shelf way back in the day that were called client server. Anyways, it's the return of client server, and it's pretty useful, right? For a lot of the reasons that we have just talked about. There's a tiny little but here, because I gotta have wiggle room. As we talked about, React's versatility is a core strength, right? It's part of the reason I think a lot of us in this room love to write React. We can make it do a lot of different things in a lot of different circumstances, right? I've been hired to help a customer move a really crappy platform to a no-code platform, right? Moved it over and they were like, but we wanted to do all this stuff. I was like, guess what? Your no-code platform does none of that stuff. So, but they're like, but we really want a no-code platform. But we really want all the other stuff. I'm like, well then I'll have to write a React app that you won't know how to fix. And I'll just tack it on, right? It works great. I hope they never have to change it. But that is one of the benefits of React, is it is just so versatile. So there will be these non-Next use cases that persist. That independent momentum that React has had, arguably since its birth, is very strong. There is a huge React community, demonstrated by all of you here, around the whole world. That ship is not going to turn on a dime, right? And in that time that it's going to take for the big ship to turn, there's always something new on the horizon, right? There'll always be another framework, there'll always be another language, there'll always be something that is right around the corner. So that is my wiggle room to say why I say I think it's going to be a big part, but it may not be the entire future of React, in my humble opinion. Questions? Yes, sir.
Great presentation, liked it a lot. My question is, oh, wow, thank you. Okay. Great presentation. I wanted to ask about your Create Next app screenshot. For one of the questions you answered, no to use Tailwind. My question is, why do you hate Tailwind so much?
Yeah, why do they tailwind?
Why do I hate Tailwind? Let me count the ways that I hate Tailwind. Okay, I don't actually hate Tailwind. Tailwind is fun. Tailwind is really useful if you use Tailwind all the time, every day. If you don't like I do, I can never remember the damn codes. I'm looking them up constantly. I've had every cheat sheet, I've had every tutorial, I've tried every mnemonic device. They are simply, I don't know, they don't stick in my brain. So it's a personal thing. I actually, I like Tailwind because I actually hate writing CSS files. If I never have to edit another CSS or Sass file again in my life, I will be so happy. And so anytime I can do styles inside the JavaScript, yes! And so Tailwind lets me do that. I just can't remember the effing codes. that's about it.
The search on the site is really good.
It is, yeah, but I hate having to go to the site. That's all. Yes, sir. Let's see if we can get the cord might just reach.
I can yell.
Or he can yell. Okay.
How do you use NextJS with something like AWS Lambda, where you can run a server and you have defined API endpoints their way, not your own server way?
You don't. It's about that simple. So I think right now there's just no other place than Vercel. Oh wait.
You can run it in a Docker container on their Docker.
Yeah.
There's a Docker service. I don't remember the name.
ECS.
Fargate. ECS.
Yeah. Yeah. You can do it in Elastic. Is that Elastic? Yeah. Elastic Beanstalk or ECS 2? Or ECS. Yeah. Whatever those are. But honestly, the pain. I mean, AWS. I mean, I love S3 all day long. Like, God, if the rest of AWS could be as simple as S3, like, yes. But I wake up at night screaming, and why I wake up at night screaming are AWS policies. Like, F me, I just can't. I can't. So anyways, my advice is if you're going to deploy Next right today, Vercel is almost the only place it makes sense to deploy. I think that's going to change. I totally want to hear your opinion. But I think that's going to change rapidly because I think a lot of people are looking at it and going, there's money to be made there, so let's copy Vercel. But today, I think Vercel is almost the only place it makes sense to deploy NextJS in a reasonable way. I mean, the gentleman here and then right back.
Quick question. So next, I'm sorry. Okay. So next is opinionated about being full stack. So how does it play with your clients, right? For example, who are not always doing something greenfield, right?
Yeah.
You might have an existing environment with front end and back end teams, or you might have a microservices environment.
Yeah.
So when you pick Next, you're kind of bound to write both types of code, and it may or may not fit into the overarching microservice framework. So what happens in these scenarios?
Short answer is don't. Unless you can forklift it all over to Next, I probably wouldn't. If the customer really wants it, I'm going to do what the customer wants, right? And so if they read a magazine on an airplane and they came to this presentation and they said, well, you told me it was the future, so I want the future. And I'm like, yeah, but you got like a whole sidecar here full of clowns that we can't cut loose. You got to make a decision. So there's no one right answer for the scenario you're describing, but I would think hard before I tried to glue all that crap together. But it's not impossible, but it's going to hurt. I think it was the guy back there, and then we'll come here.
I can just answer one of the questions related to the one regarding that gentleman and one regarding the where to deploy NextJS. So one of the biggest issues that you will have with your cell or Amplify is like egress charges. So if you go onto the platform, if you want to get out of the platform, you have to pay money towards them to kind of get out of the platform.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's one of the things is never be like that's something that people don't know about. That's the way they get you. So that's one of the things I would say, like don't do that.
Son of a. Wow.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, Vercel, Netlify, all of them are using Amazon AWS services, or a group of them with like Azure or GCP. So I would say like a good tier to join and like deploy your environment would be like GCP or Azure. They have a much more like first of all they're big organizations, and they have a really good startup tier, and they are egress charge, and they are bound to have zero egress charges. So they have signed that contract with the governments. So you can try that out.
And GCP was okay?
GCP is okay.
Okay. All right. I heard it was a nightmare, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, like we deployed a Kubernetes in GCP all the time, so we can create like a Docker and we can deploy it all the time.
Sweet.
And regarding that gentleman's question regarding microservices, so we typically use big time how do you call it migrations. We use NextJS as an orchestration layer of sorts. So the API part of NextJS actually calls in multiple microservices to solve an issue. So for example,
assuming in this case there was a bunch of client. I was assuming you were talking about there's a bunch of client code you couldn't get rid of, right? And then I'd be like, yeah. But if it's all microservices backend stuff, I love that. Yeah, that's a great solution. There was another hand. Oh yeah, sorry. The hats. Would you mind passing that along?
You're a big, from the talk, it seems like you're a big advocate for the future of being towards NextJS and sorts. Today there was a post on the React dev blog where they announced more things for React. They've been testing the React compiler on Instagram and it's shipped like entirely with the new React compiler. With like such big things still being part of Meta and being tested first at Meta and then like being available for everyone and then being implemented into Next if they choose to do so. Do you feel like the future gearing towards Next will come in the next 5 years, 3 years? What's your idea on that?
Now he wants me to commit to a timeline. I really don't know. I mean, I would be a much richer man than I am today if I could forecast that kind of stuff accurately. I agree. There's still lots of work going on, right? I haven't read that particular blog post, so I'm not familiar with the exact example you referred to. But yeah, there's still big stuff going on. I think there's been a sense. What I would argue is that I think there's been a sense among a lot of us that. I'm not going to say, obviously React is not in maintenance mode, but there haven't been, some of these long-standing problems we've had, there haven't been great fixes, right, for a while. Like, they're nibble under, maybe around the edges, maybe a little better than around the edges, but there hasn't felt like a lot of love. And so one of the things that makes me hopeful about Vercel is that they're going to double down and start pushing the envelope a little bit harder. Part of that is just that React is pretty good, right? And it's arguably a little bit mature. So maybe it's unreasonable to expect that there should be more love than it's getting. But yeah, that's a gut check. So, yeah, I think it's probably the 3 to 5 year timeline. And what was Gates? I used to be at Microsoft. What was Gates' famous quote? We always overestimate the amount of change in the next 5 years and underestimate it in the next 10, something like that, right? So it gets really dicey, but. Did I get that quote wrong? No? Okay, sorry. Tom.
Yeah, I don't know.
I just need my car.
I guess you mentioned Rails, and
Yeah.
frameworks used to be a little bit more across the spectrum of server and client. And now we see like a lot of more client-focused frameworks, if you will.
Right.
Next.
Yeah.
And I guess at first Next was basically just server-side routing. It was solving that problem. Then came the routing paradigm that was a lot simpler. I thought was simpler to understand.
Yep.
Do you see Next and Vercel adding any other solutions to Next to further solidify their hold on this?
Yeah.
And what do you think they might be?
Well, there's a ton of stuff in there. Like one of my colleagues, yesterday, was it yesterday in Thai that Andrew was all about the currency, the number formatting. I was like, what? It does number formatting? Yeah, there's a ton of useful-ish little bits kind of sprinkled throughout there that I think are great. Like we could spend all night here talking about all of the extra stuff that's in Next, but I think the big things, at least for me, are the server-side rendering and the routing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what other things I can speculate. Those have always been the two big problems for me in React. So I think the rest of it's kind of gravy, but it's the rendering, it's the routing, and the tight integration, right? And if I'm a big enterprise, if I'm a CIO, I've got 1,000 devs, I might have an existing framework that starts with A and rhymes with Angular, and maybe I'm thinking about making a change. I think Next makes that. We love you, Angular customers, wherever you are, aren't you great? Right? It starts to make it's a lot less scary than I think React of 3 years ago.
Thanks.
I probably don't need the microphone.
Okay, hit me, Michael.
We've been talking a lot about Vercel when we talk about NextJS, right?
Right.
And kind of like with AWS is vendor lock-in, right? Like you just kind of stop using AWS.
Yeah, like this table actually runs on AWS.
Yeah.
Like everything does. But sorry, go on, yes.
Yeah, so like if you are thinking of NextJS, but like you are a bit worried about how versatile is basically everything NextJS is.
Right.
Is that something like, do you ever get worried? Like, is that something that you have to consider? Like, it's like versatile starts.
Yeah, yes, but I mean, the gentleman over here, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Or in the, yeah. Anish. You know, he was pointing out that, because I thought I had heard deploying on Google was a nightmare. And he's saying, no, it's not. So I think, especially as more money starts to flow in and big enterprise customers flow in, everybody's going to want a piece. So I think that's going to democratize, right? And Vercel will be a big part, but they won't necessarily have the dominant share of hosting, even though they're arguably in the driver's seat in terms of driving the ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Export is coming. Export is on the way. Export
Right.
because the mobile as well.
Yes.
Right now Web 2
Yes.
right? So
Sorry, I went through a lot of pain in Expo in 2017. I still hear Expo and I go, phew. But yes, Expo. I hear good things now, but God, I hated it in 2017. Because that's how I got into React. I got into React through React Native back in. All right, we're probably way over time, but what is there one more? Is there one more here? No? Okay, I won't keep it any longer. Thank you very much, and speak well of us.